Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm honored to be with the other panelists to talk about how we need to value and protect our natural resources. Stuart Udall, a congressman and secretary of the Interior under Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, said it best: plans to protect air and water, wilderness and wildlife are in fact plans to protect man. We need these assets not only to survive, but to have fulfilling lives, lives that are healthy and happy. But too often, we view undeveloped land as vacant and value it for highest and best use from purely a monetary gain viewpoint. We must begin to see land in its natural state, not for what we can get out of it, but for what it offers us and saves us in money, i.e. taxes. So that's what we do at Conservation Foundation of the Gulf Coast. We save land forever, and we focus on saving land that's adjacent to water, because that's where we get our drinking water in this county and others. And that's also where we want to be. We also focus on saving land with imperiled wildlife that's connected to other conserved land and that perhaps can offer unique public access. And in our 17-year history, we've been successful at saving 46 properties for over 18,000 acres. We work in 5 counties, but we don't do this work alone. We can't. We partner, we collaborate, and we work with willing landowners and businesses and the government, all shapes and sizes, as well as you, the citizens, to save and steward our beautiful places. So why does protecting land matter? Some of the reasons are no-brainers, like protecting wildlife, ensuring we have places to recreate and enjoy nature, and the overall environmental health. But what about vibrant communities, economic vitality, and of course, our water? Saving land around our water supply is the most fiscally conservative thing we can do to ensure clean, abundant water. I'm not sure if most people know that in Sarasota, Manatee, and Charlotte counties, we get our drinking water from the surface. We do not have an abundant aquifer below us like the rest of the state. We're the only 3 counties who get the majority of our drinking water from the surface. So having land adjacent to that drinking water supply, whether it be Lake Manatee or the Peace River, and saving the land next to it is actually the most fiscally conservative thing we can do to ensure our drinking water stays clear and abundant. Because let's let the land do what we can do by building great infrastructure, building those water treatment places. And then we actually get to enjoy the land adjacent to the water, which also improves our economy. Also, having a park within 1 mile of your home increases property value as much as 15%. And neighborhood parks are integral to communities' vibrancy and security. You get to know your neighbors, and people all are in your neighborhood, get to know one another, feel better about that, as well as have healthier lifestyles, walking and enjoying the park or riding their bike. And of course, then everybody's happier as well. But let's talk tourism. In Florida, more people come to see wildlife than any other state, and that includes Alaska and Colorado, as well as Hawaii. Florida is the destination for tourists, but most think about it in terms of Mickey. But nature plays a huge role in our economy. In Sarasota County, birders stay longer and spend more money than golfers. And nature is an attractor versus an attraction. I currently serve as the chair of Visit Sarasota County, and I've learned the distinction between these 2 words. An attraction is what you do once you arrive at your destination for your vacation. An attractor is the reason you booked the trip in the first place. And of course, our #1 attractor is our beach, our beaches. But the #2 is Myakka River State Park. Our arts and culture is definitely a reason why they want to come here, but it's not the reason they book the trip. They book the trip. Those attractors are their beach and Myakka River State Park, and now the celery fields. And then we, of course, have ecotourism and how that builds into our economy. So let's talk about the celery fields. What you're looking at on your screen, all of this is the celery fields. Huge, right? These are 3 of the quad parcels that we were successful in working with Sarasota Audubon and Sarasota County to conserve. They are now protected forever, and we're working with Sarasota County as well as Sarasota Audubon Society to improve these 3 parcels. We're going to create and protect woodland for birds as well as people. We're going to have hiking trails for recreation, and we're going to create better ponds, more naturalized ponds, as well as shade trees and benches for people to enjoy. This is rethinking nature. This is the best example in Sarasota County of rethinking nature. Most people think of it as the celery fields, but before it was a farmland of celery, it was known as Big Camp Sawgrass because all of this was marshland. Now we're rethinking our stormwater and returning it back to a wetlands and marshland area, not only to hold our stormwater, but as well for us to be able to enjoy all of the animals that come into those marshlands. And then let's talk Bobby Jones Golf Club. Here's another rethinking of what we can do with our government assets and redefining our priorities. Almost 300 acres of underutilized land. And it's underutilized not only because golf is a decreasing popular sport, but as well because we're underutilizing nature. This was known as Little Camp Sawgrass 100 years ago, also a depression marsh. So what we're going to do is we're negotiating with the city of Sarasota, again, to put a conservation easement and make sure it's never developed. But we're also finalizing the design, the city is finalizing designs to not only have a little bit of golf there, not 45 holes anymore, but as well to take these man-made canals that went through Bobby Jones Golf Club and naturalize them as best we can. So we won't have erosion. We won't have stormwater runoff going into the Philippi Creek and polluting the Philippi Creek. We're going to keep that water on the property and create a little celery fields. So in conclusion, we need to rethink the way we value our natural resources. And when it comes to land, we need to first understand all the ways natural lands work for us, and then bake that value into our policy decisions, our taxing priorities, and even the way we appraise land value. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today, and I'll stop sharing my screen for the next speaker.
Great. Thank you so much, Christine, for your presentation and for giving us that watershed perspective to start out with. That's so useful, and love hearing about our successful projects at Celery Fields and our successful projects to come at Bobby Jones. So with that, I will go ahead and share Jennifer Hecker's presentation. And audience, please remember to keep throwing those comments and questions into the chat as we go. Let's see. Now it's my turn to try to share my screen. Okay. How does that look?
Looks great.
Okay, take it away, Jennifer.
Well, first, thank you everyone for coming to our session today. And it's a real honor to be on this panel with many of our wonderful partners. The CHNEP has worked closely with many of these entities here today that are participating in this event and all the entities on this panel. And I think that what we're going to share dovetails nicely into what Christine just shared. We recently did an economic value of natural resources in Central and Southwest Florida. Next slide, please. Before I get into the study itself, I just wanted to quickly say a couple words about who is the CHNEP. So we were formerly named the Shola Harbor National Estuary Program. We were formed back in 1995 as one of 28 congressionally designated estuaries of national significance in the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency as part of the National Estuary Program, along with Sarasota Bay Estuary Program, Tampa Bay Estuary Program, and the Indian River Lagoon Estuary Program in Florida. As a result, all 4 of our programs and all the others around the country that you see in this map here receive special federal funding and support under the Clean Water Act to protect and restore water resources in the CHNEP area. And I would just add that actually Sarasota County is shared by both the Sarasota Bay and Coastal and Heartland National Estuary Program Partnership. programs because we cover Lemon, Donna, and Roberts Bay, and they cover Sarasota Bay. So we work very closely with our sister NEPs. Next slide, please. A little bit about this study. I think for those of you who've been around with this workshop since the beginning, we heard this morning about Layla talking about externalities and the fact that the environment is often undervalued because it isn't assigned a monetary value. And we all, of course, understand the ecological values and benefits, but unfortunately, a lot of times in swaying policymakers, we need to quantify the return on investment for the investments that we're asking for to be made in natural resource protection, including environmental land protection, like Christine just mentioned. So the CHNEP, in response to this, has commissioned a study to quantify the amount of revenue and job generation tied to natural resources in the CHNEP area. And we felt very strongly we needed to use real world data. This is not theoretical, it's very conservative analysis based on only the data that we could actually collect, tied to things like government sales taxes, local capital improvement projects. And even within those categories, we had to sift through and find which particular projects and taxes related to natural resource protection and restoration. Just to kind of get to the punchline there, the overall value in the whole CHNEP area, which I didn't go enough into, but covers 10 counties and 27 cities total, is 13.6 annually. 3.8 billion in regional income and 146 million in local and state tax revenues that are being generated and collected specifically related to natural resource protection and restoration. And it supports over 148,000 jobs annually. So this is more jobs than the entire company of Google. I think a lot of times people think about attracting big companies and big industries. Well, natural resource protection and restoration is a big industry and driver in Central and Southwest Florida. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just quickly cover some of the major results from the different basins and from the county itself. So we broke it down, and in this report, which is available on our website, you can get these as individual fact sheets. The first one was the Donna and Roberts Bay Basin, which is a smaller coastal basin comprised of portions of Sarasota and Manatee County. You can see the star over that basin in the map to the right. The economic drivers for this basin were tourism, followed by agriculture, commercial fishing, and ecological restoration. And the totals were very large considering the size of this basin: 607 million in economic benefits, 234,000 annually in fishing production, 661 million in recreational spending, 267 million in property values, 28 million in agricultural productivity, and 231,000 in ecological restoration. Next slide, please. Next, we're going to move inland to the Myakka River Basin. This is a larger inland basin comprised of large portions of Manatee and Sarasota counties, as well as portions of Charlotte, DeSoto, and Hardy. Same economic drivers that I mentioned before. The primary driver still is tourism. And similar to higher values, we have 703 million in economic benefits, 208,000 in fishing productivity, 607 million in recreational spending, 157 million in property values. These are annual values. 230 million in agricultural production, and 1.8 million in ecological restoration. You can see there's a lot of ecological restoration in some of these areas based on larger restoration efforts like Everglades restoration. You'll see not necessarily in the Myakka River, but in some of the other basins, we have some large restoration initiatives going on. Next slide, please. Lemon Bay Basin is the final basin in the Sarasota region that our study covered. It is another smaller coastal basin comprised of portions of Charlotte and Sarasota. Similar economic drivers. You have 497 million in economic benefits, 1.08 million in fishing production, 569 million in recreational spending, 269 million in property values, 12.8 million in agricultural production, and 103,000 in ecological restoration. Next slide, please. So the final number slide for all of you, don't want to bore you to tears. You can find all these numbers and what went into them in the report. But Sarasota County, about 80% of Sarasota County lies in the CHNEP area. The rest is in the Sarasota Estuary program area. So for the 80% of the county that we cover, this is the totals for that portion of the county. Again, very large numbers. These are rolling up all of those basin areas that are within the county that we just mentioned. So you can see the figures here, and I won't mention them, but you can find them all in the report. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to go into some specific examples. There are some case examples where we looked at specific restoration projects and analyzed them specifically to look at the return on investment. This particular project is the Donna Bay Restoration Phase 2 project. It is restoring a former mining site that was heavily channelized and infested with invasive exotic vegetation. We know, of course, there's tons of great ecological benefits that come from restoration of this area, including improved water quality, more natural balance of fresh and salt water to Donna Bay, and improved seagrass beds and nursery habitat for important sport fish. Next slide, please. But when we actually looked at the economic side of it, we were really astounded at the return on investment from this particular project. The net benefits exceed the cost over a 10-year period by $78.5 million, which is a benefit to cost ratio of 8.78 to 1, which means every dollar spent in restoring this area is creating a direct economic return of $8.78. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, I think that what we found with our analysis, and this was done over a 2-year period, $100,000 with a team of economists. So it was very intensive effort to gather and analyze this data and use economic models. But it affirmed that there is a positive net benefit across every basin and county in the CHNEP area from natural resource protection and restoration. It supports that there is a need for continued conservation funding to support not only a healthy ecosystem and quality of life, but a healthy economy. And that it also affirms that the return on investments for these expensive projects that we're undertaking is going to pay back in dividends with job growth and economic growth for all the communities in our area. If you are interested in reading the report itself or accessing these county and basin to use in your work, we hope it's a resource to you. You can go on our website, chnep.org/natural resource economic valuation. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions at the end.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for getting us into those dollars and cents. That was fantastic. And next up, we have Jennifer Shafer with the Community Playbook for Clean Waterways. Take it away, Jennifer.
Thank you, Darcy. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'd like to tell you about the Community Playbook for Clean Waterways. This is a new transformative initiative of the Gulf Coast Community Foundation under the leadership of Mr. John Thaxton. I'm going to focus today on how the Playbook's nature-based regenerative solutions can help correct nutrient pollution by supporting nature's own circular solutions. So what is the Playbook? It's a powerful curated collection of actionable community-wide nutrient management activities. It's meant to focus, prioritize, and coordinate community activity and philanthropy by engaging community leaders so that our ongoing investments are smart and will deliver multiple benefits to our community. The Playbook is organized around 3 goals: reduce, remove, sustain. First, to reduce anthropogenic-based nutrient loading in natural systems by reducing fertilizers, biosolids, wastewater, septic systems, engine emissions. Second, to reduce excess anthropogenic-based nutrients from natural systems, removing them through land conservation, species restoration, green infrastructure, and stormwater BMPs. And finally, third, to build capacity and resilience to sustain water quality improvement through education, incentives, partnerships, better data, and public policy. What's in the Playbook? Well, it integrates 43 specific community-wide activities across 10 topics that consider watershed issues holistically. These strategies were identified through a facilitated in-depth discussions by local experts and practitioners, and then further developed through research, data analysis, and expert interviews. And they're all laid out in this easy to navigate website. To support first steps and foster implementation of these activities, each provides relevant and helpful information to get started, including why it needs to be done, the context, the status quo, the key players, and the specific approach with key steps for implementation, plus resources and experts who can be consulted. For scientists, educators, and policymakers looking for activities specific to their wheelhouse, the Playbook activities are key to these three approaches: science, policy, or education. But let's back up a second. Why are we so worried about nutrients that we need a playbook? Well, although they're essential for life, excess nutrients can pollute waters and soils and alter the balance of native flora and fauna in ways that degrade water bodies for fish, for wildlife, and for human uses. As nutrient levels increase, macroalgae and phytoplankton become supercharged. And in estuaries, they can outcompete seagrass. Algal blooms of macroalgae, the blue-green algae, and red tide are of particular concern. And because soils in Sarasota County are naturally rich in phosphorus, it's actually nitrogen that's the primary concern of nutrient for limiting algal growth. So why do we have excess nitrogen? Well, with a nod to circularity, we've taken the curve out of the nitrogen cycle. Sorry if you get flashbacks to your 8th grade science class, but nature doesn't take, make, and waste. It efficiently cycles nitrogen from the air to land and water, and then back into the air. Bacteria do the heavy lifting by extracting nitrogen gas from the atmosphere and converting it to plant-available forms in the soil and water. Nitrogen is naturally removed from soil and water through assimilation by plants that then further are eaten and stored in animals, and through denitrification by bacteria that return harmless nitrogen to the atmosphere, thus taking it off the menu for those fast-living, freewheeling, harmful algae that we're worried about. So how do we get out of balance? Well, humans disrupt this natural cycle by adding nitrogen from burning fossil fuels and from using an industrial method for turning atmospheric nitrogen into synthetic fertilizer. This enables us to grow more food, eat more food, and leave our excess bioactive nitrogen behind. So we're simply adding more active nitrogen to our soil and water than is cycled back to the atmosphere. If you think of it, it's kind of the reverse of our carbon problem. So returning to the Healthy Waterways Playbook. The playbook chapters are shown here in the watershed perspective, and many of the recommended activities focus on harnessing nature to rebalance the cycle. The nitrogen cycle isn't just chemistry alone, it needs biological support. And restoring and supporting natural lands, soils, and wildlife is the most effective way to take nitrogen off the menu for harmful algae. So I want to show you a few examples from the playbook. These are all from Chapter 8. Wetlands and natural shorelines are very efficient at capturing and storing nutrients. And Sarasota County has hundreds of miles of man-made canals and ditches that require intense maintenance, herbicides and mowing and cleaning and dredging. A 2019 study of Philippi Creek watershed by Wood Environmental looked at alternatives. And where riparian easements are wide enough, we can naturalize stormwater canals. Shoreline stabilization with woody plants and carbon-rich soils can provide for nutrient storage in plants and denitrification in the soils. Adding curves and bends slow the flow of water, and creating a series of pools and riffles with gravel beds allows for filtration and bacterial denitrification right in stream. And once they're mature, they're more stable, they're more productive, and they require less maintenance over time. Fish and wildlife play an important role in ecosystem nutrient cycling. Nitrogen absorbed by primary producers can bioassimilate up the food chain and be stored in animal biomass. As filter feeders, clams and oysters can remove particles from the water column that contain nitrogen and use them to build up their tissues and their shells. Oysters are about 8.4% nitrogen by weight. Juvenile fish growing up in tidal creeks can increase in weight 1,000-fold by the time they're adults, and their bodies are 2.5% nitrogen by weight. So fish and birds that migrate as part of their life cycle can transport these nutrients from nursery areas like tidal creeks and estuaries out of those systems. So stock enhancement and habitat protection pays dividends. Conservation of natural lands. This supports natural cycling of nutrients through ecosystems. And the gold star is the recently protected Orange Hammock Ranch. At close to 6,000 acres, it's the largest undeveloped land parcel in Sarasota County, much of it pristine habitats. Cheers to Christine and the Conservation Foundation for making that happen, and the many other excellent projects that she's seen to the finish line. So right now, the window of opportunity for saving land is closing. We need to diversify and accelerate our funding for acquiring the remaining restorable lands, like Bobby Jones Golf Course and the Celery Field quad parcels. And we need to make the case for stable, ongoing funding for land management and maintenance, just like it's any other public utility that needs funding. And finally, urban forestation. Trees are the bee's knees. They are concentrated goodness. And in areas of dense development where acquisition and protection of large tracts of natural land is not possible, urban forests are a first line of defense for improved water quality. And for small urban plots, high diversity microforests can grow faster and denser than conventional forests. So we need to support small grant programs for native tree planting with some professional consultations for planting the right tree in the right place. And we need to incentivize preservation of large trees and tree clusters on development sites. So there's perhaps no solution to nutrient management that provides greater community return on investment than restoring nature, as we've already heard. In addition to the magic of nutrient cycling, natural solutions provide food and shelter for fish and wildlife. They reduce erosion. They increase resilience to sea level rise. They mitigate climate change, support groundwater recharge, contribute to floodplain management and storm protection, increase public open space and nature tourism, and contribute to better community health outcomes. It's a no-brainer, as Christine Johnson says. We credit the vision of John Thaxton at the Gulf Coast Community Foundation for bringing this talented group together, and our steering committee of experts for developing the Playbook strategy. Special thanks to our co-author, Mr. Steve Swab. You can review all 43 management strategies in the Healthy Waterways Playbook, available at waterqualityplaybook.org. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for giving us some insight and some of those actions we can take to enhance the value of our natural resources. And with that, I will hand it over to our last presenter, Dr. Christine Shepard, with the Nature Conservancy in the Gulf of Mexico. Take it away, Christine.
All right, can you see that okay?
Looks great.
Okay, thank you. So today I'm going to be sharing with you a specific example of evaluation of mangroves and their risk reduction benefits that they provide. This is the results from a study that we finished and released in 2019. And the report is available as a PDF that we've shared as part of our participation in this conference. And as Jennifer mentioned earlier, all of us on this panel have interacted and worked together before, and I'm really happy to be invited to participate today to share the results of this study with you. So talking about mangroves, it's helpful to provide a little bit of a larger context of the role that coastal habitats can play in reducing risk. And when we think about coastal habitats and their role in climate adaptation and reducing risk from storms and mitigating impacts, we're really thinking about a slew of coastal habitats listed here: salt marshes, shellfish, including oyster reefs, seagrasses, mangroves, and corals. And all of these coastal habitats have the ability to store water, attenuate or reduce storm surge, and stabilize shorelines. And there's a lot of science that's helped make the case over the years for the role that these habitats can play in reducing risk and stabilizing shorelines. And that science has really advanced from just making the case that we should be considering habitats when we're thinking about how to manage our shorelines. And that science has really advanced to the point of being able to provide these economic valuations that I'm going to share with you today. At the Nature Conservancy, we have a vision that all over the world, communities and economies and people are relying on nature, really encompassing the role of these habitats when they're thinking about reducing their risk and managing their shorelines. And the science that I'm going to be sharing today really helps us facilitate that vision and help make the case for these types of conservation and restoration activities related to coastal habitats. A lot of the work that the Conservancy has engaged in falls under our coastal resilience program. Many folks, when they hear coastal resilience, they think of the decision support tool that TNC and many other partners have developed in all coastal states of the United States and a handful of countries. This is a screenshot from the coastal resilience tool that we've used in engaging with a lot of programs and projects, some within the CHNEP boundaries, to figure out where nature-based solutions might be effective and appropriate for reducing risk. But the Coastal Resilience Program is really much more than the tool. It's about the network of folks that are working and thinking on these issues, the network of folks both within the Nature Conservancy and all of our partners, from local governments, federal and state agencies, other conservation groups, to really think and share our ideas and our science and our practice, our body of practice related to using nature to reduce risk. A big part of the coastal resilience work that we engage in, as I mentioned, is the science. So the science really lays a foundation for making the case, helping to understand the role that nature can play, but also in thinking about how we would design or strategize for our conservation and restoration activities, and where it makes sense to be thinking about the role that coastal habitats play in reducing risk, how we're going to measure that, and what we can do to ensure that these coastal habitats provide these benefits in the future. So the study that I'm going to be sharing with you today was a partnership between the Nature Conservancy, UC Santa Cruz, and Risk Management Solutions. RMS provides risk information to insurers and reinsurers all over the world. And through a partnership between TNC and UC Santa Cruz and RMS, we were able to use their industry-based models to evaluate the role that mangroves played, both for Hurricane Irma and also looking at sort of an annual level of benefit provided by mangroves in Collier County, which I'll share with you as well. So the goal of the study was really to understand how and where mangrove presence affects both the extent of storm surge and the height of storm surge, and then how does that envelope of water, both with and without the mangroves, impact people and property. So we're really trying to understand, well, how do the mangroves influence storm surge when it is coming onto the coast, and what are the benefits provided to communities by mangroves? So as I mentioned, the study was a partnership between academia, our conservation group, and the insurance risk modeling company. We used their industry-based models and essentially ran the simulations of the hurricanes, both with and without the mangroves included in the data set. So what it allows us to do is to essentially flood the landscape using, we modeled Hurricane Irma for the entire state of Florida, and then calculate what the damages were from Hurricane Irma, and then rerun that simulation with the mangroves removed from the grid, and recalculate what those damages are as a second time. And then the difference between those is the estimated benefit provided by mangroves. So we did this in kind of two contexts. The first was for all counties that had were impacted by Hurricane Irma and have mangroves within the county boundaries. And then we took a different approach to look at on an annual basis in Collier County what the benefits the mangroves are providing there on an annualized basis. So first I'll start with the results from the modeling related to Hurricane Irma. We were a little bit astounded to find that mangroves averted $1.5 billion in property damages. So billion with a B. So that's a significant figure. And really it makes the case for conserving and protecting mangroves. And as a result of this study, we've been able to receive some follow-on funding to really explore more particularly where we need to be protecting mangroves to allow their upland migration with sea level rise, and also to start to think about, well, can we actually insure mangrove forests? Is it an insurable asset? And we recently received some funding to start a feasibility study to think about how we can insure this green infrastructure because of the benefits that it is providing. We found that there's a 25% reduction in terms of property damage in areas in counties that have mangroves present during Hurricane Irma. It's important to note that this effect is not consistent everywhere. In places where the mangrove stand is between the water and the property, in most cases that's a benefit to be located behind the mangrove forest. But in many locations, properties are developed kind of in the middle of the mangroves or on the outside of the mangroves. And in those cases, we can see that some of those properties have an increase in damages from their proximity and location to where the mangroves are. And that really highlights the need for thinking about where we approve development and how that's going to increase risk for adjacent properties. Here's a summary of the mangrove benefits by county. We have it kind of blocked out this way in a tabular form to show the distribution across the state of Florida, as well as to compare with the spatial maps that we have included in the report. We also took a social perspective to try and understand where people were benefiting from the presence of mangroves, and more than 500,000 people benefited from mangroves during Hurricane Irma. So their damages were less because they were located behind a mangrove stand. Similarly to the asset damage information, there were some negative impacts in terms of areas where development is taking place right within the mangroves or on the outside of the mangroves. So the kind of orientation between the water coming on shore and the properties in the mangroves isn't such that a benefit was provided. I mentioned there's a second component to the study that we did where we wanted to look at what the avoided damages are that we can attribute to mangroves on an annual basis. So not focused on just Hurricane Irma, but we ran a model of 100 simulated storms that represent the annual risk of storm surge for Collier County. And we found that there was a similar benefit as far as the benefits provided by mangroves in reducing the damage through these modeled storms by 25% for Collier County. So this slide here shows those areas behind the mangroves that those models showed are benefiting the most from the mangroves along the coastline. When you include the entire picture of where all of the development is, you can kind of see the red here that in areas where the development is directly within or outside of those mangrove areas, you can see some negative impacts as far as the water sort of building up there and seeing additional flooding impacts as far as damages to these properties. We have a diagram that we developed to kind of visualize what's happening there as far as the storm surge level coming in, and on the backside of the mangroves, we are seeing that envelope of water have a lower height and a decreased footprint, and as a result there is less damage to the homes. But that water does tend to pile up at the front of those mangrove forests. It's a conservation of that water there. And so it's really important, as I mentioned, when we're thinking about allowing development in these types of situations where it's actually increasing the risk to the homeowners and adjacent homeowners, and also thinking about when we allow channels to be established or widened, what types of impacts those will have as well, because you're impeding the barrier that the mangroves help provide. So in summary, this is a really important study because we're able to put a dollar figure to a particular storm in the state of Florida that really highlights the tremendous value of natural infrastructure and the mangroves and the benefits that they provide in the state of Florida. We saw a 25% reduction as far as damages seen both from Hurricane Irma specifically, and also when you think about it on an annual basis, the benefits that mangroves are providing within Collier County. As I mentioned, we have some new projects starting to think about the feasibility of ensuring mangroves, and also a mangrove migration study where we're really thinking about being more strategic about protecting the areas upland and adjacent to mangrove forests so that they can continue to provide this benefit in the future. Because if we don't protect those areas behind them, and in some cases adjust them to provide these corridors for migration, that benefit will slowly decrease over time if they don't have any space to migrate into. And that's all I have for today. Thank you for the opportunity to share our study.
I left myself on mute. Sorry, that's a terrible moderator faux pas. So I think we probably only have time for one question here before we're moving on to closing remarks on the main stage. So I think what I'll do is kind of try to roll up a couple here. And this is for anyone who would like to respond. And the question is, could we compare the nutrient reduction and other kind of ecosystem services benefits of natural systems to the infrastructure that we usually put in to do these services? And how do we get that information into the hands of decision makers and policy makers to help inform those kinds of decisions? I know that's a big question, but if anyone wants to take a stab at it.
I'll just jump in and say that there absolutely are ways of looking at replacement service cost. And I believe that was a portion of the analysis that the team of economists that were involved in our report did. But it really is dependent on the data that's available for each area. And so it's a case by case, whether we had to really look at different ways of taking available data and crunching it in a reputable way to get the numbers. So, but that certainly is one way. When you can actually quantify the nutrient removal, you can then look at comparative technologies and what the costs of implementing those would be, and then explain that in those terms.
And I think for Jennifer Shafer, perhaps that was the impetus, right, for the playbook.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, we collected data as we could on the functional and operational costs of public utilities, wastewater treatment plants, the cost of building and maintaining septic systems, the built solutions. And we have cost per pound of removal for nitrogen for many of those solutions. And now that that some of these economic studies have been published, Jennifer, I'm going to take a close look at yours to see if we can put some dollars on the natural solutions and line them all up, and we'll see who wins. I think we know.
Okay. Well, wonderful, everyone. I'm sorry we didn't have more time for questions, but I'm really glad that we were able to see all of those presentations today. They were fantastic. I love the way that they all intertwined with each other. I got a lot more out of it than I would have gotten out of a single one alone. So I hope that was true for everybody today. Thank you so much to our presenters and to the audience for joining us. And I think there's something going on that main stage. So we will see you all there. Thank you again.